I'll start my timer so I can keep track of how long I've been waffling. Right, good morning. My name is Nicholas McDermott, and my presentation, Slavery and Diplomacy, is based on my first year PhD work, which I started in September. Why I'm talking about slavery and diplomacy? Slaves are quite often, in a lot of the more modern context, defined as being socially isolated, socially dead, to quote Orlando Patterson. And I disagree, and this will show that slaves are involved in diplomacy. They are used by their owners as diplomatic tools, but they themselves engage in interacting with foreign countries, with foreign diplomats, and are very much a part of the society in which they live, and should not be seen as isolated or unable to communicate. What I'm going to talk about, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the Hospitallers, to what Hospitallers were up to. I'm going to talk about captive or slave. One of the main issues I've come across in my research is that people quite often look at the people I'm talking about and say these are captives, not slaves. And I'm going to talk about why I call them slaves and my justification for that. Then I'm going to get into the real meat of things, intentional use of slaves by the Hospitallers as diplomatic tools, and independent action by the slaves, before finishing up with the Great Conspiracy of 1749, which is a great story and really sums up all of the things I'm talking about. It involves lots of foreign powers using slaves and slaves trying to help themselves. Captive or slave? I've started here with a couple of quotes from Yvonne Friedman's book, Encounters Between Enemies. Many captives were used by their captors as slaves until they were ransomed. The military orders used the captives as slave labour. Yvonne Friedman tries to avoid calling people slaves, painfully so to a certain extent, since many of the people she's talking about are never going to be freed. They are never going to be ransomed. They are actually born into the situation in which they live. They have never been free. But I would agree that captives tend to be, if you're going to be ransomed, I can see you being a captive. That makes sense. And I've put a couple of examples here that I'm going to discuss that are very much captives. They are people that the military orders, the Hospitallers, have taken captive and are treating as captives rather than slaves. And when I talk about the use of slaves by the Hospitallers, this difference will become even more clear. So first of all, Prince Jem in 1486. He's actually an unusual captive. He is an heir to the Ottoman throne, and his brother pays the order to keep him as a captive. The order are paid to keep this guy and not let him get out. And they're paid a ridiculous amount of money. They're paid 45,000 gold ducats a year, which is tons for them. It makes most of their other income seem not that impressive. Just to keep this guy in captivity. And he is well treated. He is toured around Europe. The Pope gets to meet him for a bit. He has his own slaves who serve him. He is kept in luxury. He is not digging a ditch or growing sugar. The captain of Samaria, 1394, captures two sons of a leading official and exchanges them for a 7-year truce and 10,000 gold ducats. Once again, these two kids were never going to be treated like slaves. They were never going to be put into the slave prison housing. They were never going to be digging. They were never going to be rowing ships. They were always going to be treated as captives because they're sons of a leading officer. They're important people that can be used. Whereas a lot of the other people, most of the people the Hospitallers capture are just people. They're not specifically important. The ones who are important tend to get off the island very quickly in exchange for a large sum of money. The other ones who stay there for years or end up having kids there or never get freed are very much slaves rather than captives. Hospitaller timeline. 800 years and 8 bullet points. Establishment of the order, 1060-ish. I'll say ish because the Hospitallers like to pretend it's 200 BC when they were established and Jesus Christ worked in the hospital and performed all of his miracles there, which is why you should give them money. And this is the very Hospitaller order, and they're looking after pilgrims and they're very friendly. That doesn't last very long. The First Crusade comes along, the Crusade state's set up, and Hospitallers get given some castles to defend and start using swords and talk to the Pope and ask if they'd be allowed to use swords, and the Pope goes, sure, go for it. And you get the military order, and they're doing the military stuff. Jump forward 200 years to the fall of Acre. The Crusader states